Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz Interview Series with veteran jazz drummer Peter Kogan. He opened up about his stellar new 2019 CD called The Green Album. So his musical journey began at 6 on the violin. He added piano at 8 and drums at 10. A year later, he began serious study with Saul Goodman of the New York Philharmonic. He would go on to a classical career with the Cleveland Orchestra, Pittsburgh Symphony, and he spent 6 years in New York City as a drum set player and composer backing up blues legends. Then it was on to Honolulu for the Symphony. Then he joined the Minnesota Orchestra, and after all of these years, he's back home, literally, with jazz. Listen to the story, get to know him, and dig this interview, my friends.
Thank you, Peter, for taking a minute to talk to me about the Green Album and your life in music.
Sure. I'm delighted to have the opportunity.
Right on. So what I want to do up front, I've put in this album in my CD player. I still roll that way. And I like to drive and listen to music, and I'm keeping this in. I think I've probably had it on rotation for at least 10 to 12 times up to this point over the last couple of days.
Wow.
And, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I love it. And my question to you is, you got a lot of standards on here, but you also have a lot of, there's just so many things that are going on. There's so many guest musicians. So my question to you is this: what was your vision for this album?
Well, this was really almost like the end of a three-album set. Because it included my originals and a couple of tunes that go way back that I had never written down, that were written, when I was much younger. What's happened over the last 5 years, 6, 7, 8 years is that I've come back to playing jazz and to writing again. And when I revisited some of my older compositions, I rewrote them. So, for instance, the FLW Blues Evolution, the first tune on the album, it also appears in a slightly different version on my first album from 2013, which was called Cornucopia. This tune just kept getting rewritten. So this is, I think, the final form of it, and that's why it's called MLW Blues Evolution, because it kept evolving. There were some recent tunes on this album. The second two tunes, Slippery Slope and Miles Back, were post-2016 election tunes that kind of reflect how I was feeling after the presidential election. For this album, I wanted for the first time to put in some standard tunes that I love, standard jazz tunes that I love, and that's where I ended up with Con Alma and My Little Suede Shoes. I've been basically working with two different bands. I have my septet, which has guitar and trombone in addition to the trumpet and sax, and then the rhythm section. And a lot of the stuff on the albums was written for the septet, but I had been working a lot with a quintet with just the trumpet and sax. So this Green Album has a bunch of tunes that are done with the quintet, and some of them are the cover tunes like Con Alma and My Little Suede Shoes, and some of the others like Fool's Blues and Miles Back are originals done with the quintet, and I decided to keep that format. And then the rest of the album has the full band. I guess the other part of my concept is that I wanted to explore different rhythmic feels and grooves on each track. So I want to have a lot of contrast and kind of put forth what I've been working on in terms of different styles of groove, and so that's part of the concept as well.
So let's get to the beginnings of how you became a musician. Now, are you from Minnesota, or where were you born and raised?
No, I was born in Yonkers, New York, and raised mostly in New Rochelle, New York. I had a family where, we were all given instruments at a very young age, and I actually started the violin when I was 6 years old, added piano when I was about 9 or 10, and then I really got intrigued with the drums, and I noticed kids on the playground in elementary school with drumsticks, and I really got attracted to that. And in those days, you had, band and orchestra at the elementary school, and the band director would also give private, group lessons. So I started taking group drum lessons and really got into that. And by the time I was finished with elementary school, I was ready to just quit the violin and just go with the drums. And, of course, we had records around the house. We had a neighbor who turned me on to the Benny Goodman combos and Jimmy Lunsford big band stuff. And then I was very, very fortunate to go to a summer music camp. And at the music camp, one of the teachers was Chuck Israels, the great bassist, who at the time was working with Max Roach at the Jazz Barn up in Connecticut, or I should say up in Massachusetts. And I took a little class with him where he introduced us to bebop and Thelonious Monk, and that from there I just was a love affair with jazz. I started collecting records and put together bands in junior high school and high school. At that point, though, I got waylaid by a more serious professional kind of itch to become a classical musician. So I studied at Juilliard and at the Cleveland Institute of Music with two great timpanists, and I ended up with a career in classical music, which started out in the Cleveland Orchestra, went to the Pittsburgh Symphony as principal percussionist, and at that point I was about 30 years old, and I started itching to play drum set again. So I took a hiatus of about 6 years. I was in New York in the late 70s and early 80s playing drum set with all kinds of bands, including jam sessions in my apartment and just scuffling, basically, driving a cab. But I got a chance to play a lot of different kinds of music until I got married, decided that I needed an income that was a little more sustainable, and I auditioned for the Honolulu Symphony, and that's where that tune Honolulu comes from, actually. I ended up playing in Honolulu for a couple of years and then got my job in the Minnesota Orchestra as principal timpanist, where I was for 29 years. So towards the end of that time, or in the early 2000s, I started playing drum set again and immediately realized what a joy that was for me, and started revisiting some of my old compositions and writing again. And that led to my first album and to my retirement from the Minnesota Orchestra, where I could concentrate on playing jazz and writing. That's sort of where I am right now.
Right on. Yeah, that's quite a ride. So my question is, you know, you've hopped between these worlds of blues, jazz, and classical. Mm-hmm. What's the big difference? Is music, or is there really a big difference between these worlds you've traversed through?
Well, as a drummer, I think there is a big difference in terms of the kind of thing you do. You know, as an orchestral percussionist and timpanist, you are a colorist to a large degree. As a timpanist, you're playing the 5/1. You're playing the outlines of the main harmonies of music. But the tempo is always flexible in classical music. It's rarely steady. So the whole groove thing is somewhat more on a more flexible scale. So for me, it's kind of a relief to just concentrate on steady time and groove. That's one of the big differences. The other big difference is the form of classical music is so complex. The form of most jazz, which is, you know, to allow improvisation, the form is fairly simple. Either it's a blues form or a song form or a variety of that. And I think the influence on me of the classical music that I heard for so many years is just allowed me to think of forms a little more flexibly. And so a lot of my compositions are not of the standard form. So
was there a level of relief to get into a more improv role in jazz versus the more regimented world?
It sure was. You know, you're on your own in jazz. There's no conductor. There's no written music. There is written music, but you have much more flexibility, and it's been a real joy to get back to it, I got to say.
So when you did get back into jazz and you started doing, you know, your first original composition, Cornucopia, and then you went on from there, was it a huge relief to actually have that physical CD out there and that you had kind of crossed over from one genre and you were landing in jazz?
Yeah, I would say so. It's been a real delight, and I'm really getting a lot of joy from playing, and also from practicing, the drums again, and trying to deal with all the challenges of being a decent drummer. So it's filled up my time quite a bit. And what's also a challenge, of course, is like with every freelance musician is booking my own engagements and finding work. And what's great is that in Minnesota, in the Twin Cities, Minnesota, there are just a huge pool of talented musicians. And as I've gotten to know these guys, you can see on the cover of the Green album, I have like 15 sidemen. That's partly because these are guys I've worked with over a period of time, but also because at the recording sessions somebody wasn't available of my regular crew, but someone from my previous crew was available, so I was able to utilize that. And I'm really glad actually so many people got involved with this.
So early on in your life, one of the big pieces of education for anybody, whether you're a musician or you're a fan, is seeing live jazz shows. Early on in your life, what live jazz shows did you see that really left an impression on you?
Wow. Okay. Well, a friend of mine and I took the New Haven line to 125th Street and saw a show at the Apollo, which was one of these daytime shows. I must have been about 16. Daytime show, and it had the Jazz Tet with Art Farmer and Benny Golson, and it had Shirley Scott and Stanley Turrentine playing. It was like with a movie double feature, but wow. That was like a thrill. I did. A neighbor of mine, ours, took me down to see the Ornette Coleman at the 5-Spot in this famous initial engagement there. So I got it, and of course I didn't understand a bit of it at the time. Now I think those things are just classics, but at the time that kind of free-floating harmonic jazz without chord changes, or only inferred chord changes, that was really challenging for me as a teenager. I also got a chance to hear Eric Dolphy and Thelonious Monk play in those years. Went down to Birdland and heard Count Basie's band when I was 15. In those days they had a non-drinking section, and you could talk your way in there. You were supposed to be 16 or older. I think I was 15. We managed to get ourselves in there. The Jazz Gallery also, I think, in those days in New York had a seating for non-drinkers. So I got a chance to hear some terrific people, and Art Blakey and Philly Joe Jones. There were concerts at Town Hall I was able to go to as a kid. So all of this made a terrific impression on me. I was able to hear Miles Davis with Tony Williams when he first joined the band at the Village Gate. I had these great listening experiences when I was a kid, and I did set it aside for many years when I went into classical music, but I never stopped listening to jazz.
So if you have a dream tonight and you get to sit across from yourself 30 years younger, what advice are you going to give yourself?
Oh, well, I might have considered, spending more time at doing jazz, but it was a struggle. It would have been a real struggle, and I'm kind of pretty happy with the way things came out. I mean, I wish I had spent more time at the Kit all these years, because I did set it aside for many years, but I can't complain about where I am right now, to tell you the truth.
Yeah, without a doubt. So I wouldn't say you're a late bloomer, but I would say that there's a part of you that's probably catching up to some of these jazz visions that you have of what you want to do. What's the future look like? What do you want to do? How do you want to branch out, not only with releasing albums, but performing with cats? What do you want to do?
I think the next step would be to play some festivals and do some playing outside of the Twin Cities. I'd love to get an opportunity to do that. And I'm hoping that'll occur in the next year or so. And we'll see what happens. But I'm glad that the album is getting around, and so far the feedback has been really nice, and we'll see. I am just looking for opportunities to play and get my music out there.
So I guess the one thing I should have piggybacked off of that question about what shows did you see earlier on, and kind of do this. If you had a jazz DeLorean that pulled up in front of your house, and you could punch in the digits, and you could go back in time and see anybody anywhere, who would you want to see?
Well, I think I definitely want to see the Duke Ellington Band in the 20s and 30s, and I definitely want to see the Count Basie Orchestra in the 1930s, and I definitely want to see Diz and Bird in the 40s, and then I did get a chance to see some of the guys in the 50s and 60s. I definitely would want to spend some time catching Coltrane and Elvin Jones in their heyday. Gosh, you name a great musician, I would want to hear them for sure.
Well, you basically just said in that first part, especially, you would be coming to Kansas City, so that would be on your list.
Definitely would be. For
sure. So why do you love jazz?
God, why do I love jazz? It moves me. It moves me. It gets to me, and I love the harmonic flexibility and the variety. I love the earthiness of the blues bass of the form. I love the rhythm, and I love the improvisation. I love everything about it.
So this is it. This is my final question. It comes down to this, and everyone has a perception or an interpretation of who they think you are as a person. Your family, your friends, your fans, but you know yourself best. Who do you think you are?
Well, I'm a musician. I love music. I'm a student of music. I still have a lot to learn, and I'm also a parent. I'm a husband. I try and be a good person. That's it.
I like it. Peter, thank you for taking some time out. I love the album, really genuinely, and good luck with everything, and thanks for what you do for jazz. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Joe. I got to say, I'm so glad you like the album.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to yet another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players in Hawaii, Minnesota, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. Thanks to Peter for his music and his stories. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino on the iTunes Store. Visit Neon Jazz at youtube.com, and for everything Neon Jazz all the time, go to theneonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the music, my friends.
Neon Jazz.